Welcome back to the nationally syndicated Price of Business show. I'm your host, Kevin Price, talking to you about you and your business. Delighted to have on the program Mark Mix. He's been on the show before. He's with National Right to Work, and it's an organization out of Washington, D.C. that really, people, when the whole issue of right to work has been framed by the media in such weird ways where, the way it's positioned is that closed union shops, which is shops you're required to join when you join a company, that's looking out for the worker, and right to work is looking out for business. But the reality is that right to work is all about your ability to be able to work. And wherever right to work legislation has happened, unemployment in those states have always gone down, and arguably so has cost of living, because labor is a huge factor in that, as well as other factors. And so I, for one, have long been a fan of right to work, and at the same time believe that people should be allowed to join unions, but unions should be competitive. You shouldn't automatically be in a union just because you started working for a company, which makes flabby unions, ineffective unions, really politically driven unions. And so to me, there's a third way, and the right to work way is that way. And Mark, always glad to have you on the program.
Well, Kevin, thank you for the opportunity, but there's really not much more for me to say. You have synthesized the right to work issue very, very effectively in the first minute of this conversation that I'm excited to have with you.
Yeah, always glad to have you on. We do need to talk, though, because not everyone agrees with us, and so we got to keep talking about it. And one of those people, of course, would be Joe Biden. And Joe Biden, for people who don't, we don't really know much about Joe Biden. We've seen hypervigilance regarding President Trump, but really because Biden's been around forever, I'll remind the listener he was in the U.S. Senate since Richard Nixon was president. That's a long time, before he became vice president of the United States. And for a guy who has been in the public life on a very large scale forever, we don't really know all that much about him. He's been in the peanut gallery, which is the Senate. They don't really do much other than criticize. Same with the House, although there is more action there. And so, we get a chance to see the real Joe Biden, and remember, he's a guy from Pennsylvania. Pennsylvania is one of those big union states, and even though Delaware is kind of a different animal, I don't think he's abandoned those big union roots. And if anything, I would say if there's two primary issues of this president, one of them is the environment, the Green New Deal. He calls it something different, but when you look at it, it's almost identical. And I would say big unions. Those are his two drivers. What do you think?
Yeah, Kevin. I mean, he made that very clear on the campaign trail. I'm sorry, it wasn't necessarily on the campaign trail, but it was, in his speeches from his basement and speeches that were pushed out via video about to union officials and to state union organizations around the country, that his primary goal as president was going to be to promote unions, promote unions, promote unions. In fact, he said it 3 times in one speech. And what he really means with that is it's not promoting workers and rank and file workers. He means promoting union officials, because on the campaign trail, promoting union officials is most important thing for, in this instance, a Democrat candidate. I mean, obviously, union officials are very big players in the public policy process. Kevin, you made this clear, because their privileges are basically granted by government, whether it be a state government or a local government or the federal government. The power that union officials have amassed over the years to compel workers to pay dues or fees to work or join a union, frankly, before a 1963 Supreme Court case, and continuing on through today, where the law says that they can force a worker to pay up to 100% of union dues to keep their jobs. That's tantamount to joining a union in anybody's eyes, frankly. But the bottom line is this: Joe Biden understands that organized labor and the money they bring to the table in a political context is very, very important. And without it, he didn't think he could win. And Joe Biden's history as a U.S. senator and as a vice president has continued to be one in favor of union compulsion, the idea that you need to force workers to pay dues in order to work in America. And Kevin, as you pointed out, this argument really is kind of a third way, because when you break the right to work issue down and you break the issue of organized labor down, the one thing they're demanding and the one thing they're saying is that if the workers that they claim to represent were given a chance to decide whether or not they wanted to join them or financially support them. That if they had the right to do that, the unions would be destroyed. Now, that's an argument against the very workers they claim to represent, instead of the so-called evil employers that provide opportunities for workers to feed their families and create value and to grow in this country. It's a really amazing argument when you think about it, that the only way unions can survive is if the federal government continues to give them or expands their right to force workers into their union collectives.
Yeah, and really, when you look at it, to me, when you look at the way closed union shops are operated, it has that whole sense of the small business owner who's forced to pay that guy in his neighborhood to protect his store, or he can expect regularly having windows broken at his store. It has that same almost extortion quid pro quo quality to it. And, and the analogy you just gave was very similar, to, our really brings this idea that people who are average employees don't have enough sense to operate in their own self-interest. It's a really dim view of the capabilities of the people they're trying to represent. It's really incredible when you think about that. And again, and I think when people hear this debate, Mark, people go back, to the robber baron era, and they look at, where there was absolute violence at every attempt to organize. It was impossible to organize some places, and we're not advocating that. And I'm not naive enough to think that an individual is going to be able to negotiate unless he brings a lot of credentials, relationships, or skills that a company needs in a way that's going to overwhelmingly be in his best interest. And, and it might be helpful for him to be a part of a collective, but it needs to be a voluntary collective, or it's something more of a Marxist variety.
Absolutely, and it's interesting, Kevin. Your views on this reflect the views of the man that was known as the father of American labor unions, Samuel Gompers, in a speech that he gave, his final speech to the AFL. At that time, the AFL and the CIO were separate, but in 1924, in Texas, El Paso, his last speech as the kind of leader of the American labor movement, he said this. He said, "I want to urge devotion to the fundamentals of human liberty, the principles of voluntarism. No lasting gain has ever come from compulsion. If we, the unions, seek to force, no gain will come from compulsion. If we seek to force, we but tear apart that which united is invincible." And Gompers understood this. He said, the moment you go to government for this power and this privilege, is you're going to become wards of the government, and that's what's happened with organized labor. And that's why their legislative agenda is such a big part of Joe Biden's agenda, at least on the campaign trail. Whether it is when they get into the legislative, the machinations of legislation and passing laws and the impact that it will have on the country and the economy, things may slow down a little bit, but there will be no lack of trying. In fact, Richard Trumka, the president of the AFL-CIO, put out a statement yesterday saying this is the best environment organized labor has had, and they're going to make an aggressive push to dramatically expand their power over small business people and workers in this country, and they're going to do it by government decree, and the foundation of that decree is going to be you have to do this, the compulsion, the force. That's going to be what's written in to every piece of legislation that they're considering, both from an executive administrative branch level on rulemaking and regulations and the legislative level that will come out of Congress.
So we kind of geeked out on some philosophical foundations that are important and even fun, but I also want to touch a little bit on some of the players that Biden has chosen with just a few minutes left. Kind of give us a quick panoramic overview, and there's still other positions that will have an influence on labor that we're not even sure where he's going to go on those. But what we do know, real quick, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah, well, first of all, we know that Joe Biden and Kamala Harris have both said they want to repeal all the right-to-work laws. And so now he has a labor secretary nominee, Marty Walsh, who's been the longtime Boston mayor, a member of the Massachusetts state legislature, and a former trade union official who is going to come to the Department of Labor and look at what they can do there to expand union power through wage and hour legislation, through OSHA legislation, through joint employer legislation that says, as a business person, if you hire independent employees to help you with your business or or you hire contract employees, that they are now your employees and subject to unionization. There's a whole bunch of stuff that is probably going to happen at the Department of Labor that they've been waiting on and thinking about, because not much change under the Trump administration, frankly, at the DOL. I mean, the bureaucracy there is so large and so difficult to turn, and the process is so difficult to overturn and change that really not a whole lot changed over the last 4 years, but they're going to expand on some of the things that they tried to do under the Obama administration. His Health and Human Services Secretary, Becerra from California, I mean, this guy is going to go back and he's going to make sure that union officials in the health sector area are able to take Medicaid money from Medicaid providers, people that provide services to disabled people, and they're going to send the money directly to unions. We filed a lawsuit back in 2014, a case called Harris v. Quinn, where we exposed this Medicaid dues skim where then Governor Rod Blagojevich in Illinois decided that the SEIU ought to get a cut of the Medicaid money that was coming into the state. Several groups organized and got that overturned at the federal level because the Medicaid regulations say that no money at all is supposed to go to a third party when it comes to the aid that they're providing folks that qualify for Medicaid and Medicare. But yet the federal government was allowing this so-called dues skim for union officials, and we got that stopped, and I suspect that Becerra will immediately go in and try to overturn that and get that money flow, that river of money going back to the union officials in the health sector. So there's a lot going on, and obviously he's going to get a couple of appointments to the National Labor Relations Board, which is a 5-member agency that basically adjudicates federal labor policy. While the last 4 years have been interesting in rolling back some of the Obama grabs that occurred during his 8 years with his appointees running the National Labor Relations Board, Biden, I think, will jump in there very quickly starting in August or September of this year, and he will appoint or nominate a couple of folks, mostly union officials. That's who gets the job when the Democrats are in charge. Therefore, union lawyers and union officials get those jobs, and they're going to try to overturn and roll back some significant victories we've won on behalf of workers at the National Labor Relations Board. So there's lots of opportunities for them. They've indicated both publicly and now privately that they're going to push. And the one common denominator of all this is how they can empower union officials to be stronger and use their governmental granted power to force more workers into unions.
Well, that's a very, very good job of giving us a panoramic overview. And I think it was important for us to spend the time we spent talking about the philosophy, because there are different philosophies that are at play here. And I really appreciate you talking about the bureaucracy. Roughly 95% plus of every department is bureaucratic, people who are there many years before the sitting president, and they have a profound impact. It's really difficult. They use the example of a ship and a rudder and how it can take a long time based on the size of the ship. Well, take the biggest ship and multiply it by hundreds, and that's kind of what they're dealing with. And so, and the current infrastructure of the Department of Labor is very, very progressive, has been for a very long time. And so that's what they deal with there. And so it's going to be a much easier place for them to get things done, I would think. Mark Mix, he is the president of National Right to Work. Always enjoy having you on the program. When we get more appointees, let's have another chat and kind of talk about what's going on in the state of unions, and more importantly, the state of the individual trying to make a living today. I think it's crucial. Thanks so much, Mark.
My pleasure, Kevin. Thanks for the opportunity.
I'm Kevin Price. You're listening to the nationally syndicated Price of Business show. It's a show that never ends. It continues 24/7 at priceofbusiness.com, where we are always adding new content. Stay tuned for more after this on this station.